Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's 55 years since my last confession, Father. And when are you going to confess, Father? Silence. Oh, God has spoken. There's something queer in the air. You can almost taste it. Good evening, good afternoon, I should say, Homo sapiens, homoxuals, and all colours of our queer rainbow, and the monotone ones too. I dedicate my talk today to Peter Haffenden, a dear friend and colleague and mentor who is, as I speak, fighting cancer. We wish you well, Peter. My name is Tim McKew. I am a gay elder. Let's call me a gelder. I was born in 1955 and I come from the then working class seaside suburb of Garden City, Port Melbourne. I grew up in the 60s, the youngest of 5 children, to Irish, Italian Catholic parents, Patrick and Patricia, Pat and Pat. My father was a wharfie and an SB bookie. I never came out because I've never been in. Being brought up on the stage from the age of 7 and being surrounded by theatricals, one was just naturally out. The performing arts have always been a safe place for homosexuals, and young budding ones like me thrived in that protective hothouse. I was the last born and apparently a Catholic accident. The rhythm method was certainly not working that night, and little Timmy came out singing. This gift my mother had also. It came from the Italian side of our family. Uncle Mario, my great Uncle Mario Del Madre, who lived in Potts Point, Sydney all his life, had been a fine opera singer and devoted his gifts to St. Mary's Cathedral. I was privileged to be a part of the early days of Australian television in glorious black and white. This is a colour shot of the studio floor at Channel 7 in Dorcas Street, South Melbourne. From the age of 10 to 14, from 1965 to 69, I was a little songbird on Channel 7's part national, I Know They Got It in Orange, TV show entitled Brian and the Juniors. We are the juniors, juniors, saying hello to you. The show also included other artists such as Ernie Sigley, Deborah Byrne, and Jamie Redfern, the same Jamie who performed with Liberace. That could have been you, my mum said. You should smile more, you won't get far with a frown. In response to my success on the show, I would often get abuse hurled at me from the other boys at the Catholic schools. You're a sissy, you're a pufter, you dance with girls. I also got bashed. However, Monsignor Penn Jones from St. Patrick's Cathedral, observing this, took this 12-year-old under his wing. He would take me to Brighton Beach and we would lie on the sand together and talk about the show, religious faith, and my family life. I was told much later that he was probably grooming me. I remember I was rather flirtatious with him one Sunday and asked him about puberty. I could sense he was very uncomfortable, and I feel that if he was grooming me, little Timmy turned the tables and took away his power, because that sort of thing doesn't happen. He never took me to the beach again. I did read many years later on the Broken Rights website that he had sexually abused boys, but thankfully nothing had happened to me. When my voice started to change at the tender age of 14, descending from gold to bronze, the producer of Brian and the Juniors, Max Irvine, decided I could no longer be a junior. Mother was inconsolable. I can't stay a child forever, Mother. At the end of my last show, some of the girls burst into tears, which caused me to burst into floods of tears also. At the age of 15 in 1970, I knew I was attracted to other boys, and it was at that time I joined the Theosophical Society Library of Melbourne and read up on subjects like Hindu mysticism, astral travelling, and Aleister Crowley. It was also the only place where you could buy incense apart from church shops. I would practice astral travelling, staring into the mirror, watching steam rising from a bowl of hot water, imagining it was my spirit whilst immersed in a cloud of sandalwood incense. "What's that smell?" Mother would yell from downstairs. "I'm trying to leave my body, Mum," I replied. "Well, get back into your body and come downstairs, your tea's ready." Mum found all my occult books, confiscated them, and threw them into the fire. In 71, I had a crush on an Italian boy named Livio. He was tall, with straight, soft, mousy blonde hair and chiseled cheekbones, who resembled Tadzio from Death in Venice. I asked him to teach me Italian after school. We would converse in simple Italian, and he regularly corrected me. I liked being corrected by Livio. We remained friends, but nothing more. All the boys who avoided sports day became my friends. We were drawn to each other by a queer magnetism, for we were all of the same cloth, chiffon. We were all homosexual, as it turned out. Funny about that. I first heard the word gay and read the word gay in the Nation Review, a groundbreaking countercultural weekly newspaper that had contributors such as Germaine Greer and Philip Adams. The paper also had a dalliance column where all tastes were catered for, gay, straight, bisexual, etc. It was mind-blowing. Nothing like this had ever been available before. We were on the wave of a cultural revolution, with a global gay liberation movement unfolding. With the reverberations of Stonewall in America, the women's liberation movement, the civil rights movement and Black Power, the oppressed were finding their voice, and the Labour Party, led by Gough Whitlam, were swept to power in a landslide victory. These were amazing times. In that final year of secondary education, I started the St. Joseph's Drama Club with my friend Alan Laurie, with the help from the English teacher Kerry Eccles, a lesbian in green velvet slacks. If the gays were hidden, the lesbians were buried from view. A little martini. Bombay Sapphire. We entered the state Catholic drama competition and chose the religious play Son of Man by English playwright Dennis Potter. Moral crusader Mary Whitehouse accused the author of blasphemy and tried to have the play banned. Alan was to play Jesus, and I was cast as the plotting high priest Caiaphas. Alan was miscast as Jesus. With his blonde locks, he looked more like Shirley Temple. We became lovers. He was my very first homosexual experience. You never forget your first. But I soon fell in love with another boy at my school, with the hair the colour of golden wheat and powder blue eyes, David Kelly, and a smile. Ah, such a smile. I was a lovesick schoolboy. I would play my Melanie Safka records at home in Garden City, burn my Agabathy rose incense, and write off love poem after love poem. I took the poems to school one day. They were found and given straight to the principal. All hell broke loose. My parents were called in. Shock horror, your son is a homosexual. I was sent to the Catholic psychologist in Brighton, Melbourne, and to a Collins Street specialist, and under the advice of the Catholic Church and psychiatric authorities, I was admitted to a Catholic hospital, St. John of God, where I was given shock treatment to rewire my gay brain. This young man of 17 years old, his neural pathways were still forming and now altered and perhaps damaged by having my brain fried with 7 days of shock treatment. Needless to say, it didn't work. And a few short years later, I returned the favour and gave society shock treatment in the form of anarchic cabaret. The gay cabaret activist was born. Don't clap, throw money. I became a frequent visitor to Society 5, a recently formed gay rights and social support organisation, similar to CAMP in Sydney. And in '73, I also joined Gay Lib at Melbourne University. It was so liberating, pardon the pun, to see that there were so many others like me out there. Well, not quite like me, of course. This was a year of Gay Pride Week in Melbourne, a September week of events, including discussion nights, films, gay poetry, the Gay Pride March in Melbourne CBD, and a gay dance and picnic. We were marching proud for equality, no more discrimination and criminalisation of homosexuals. Walking home after the gay dance had finished, I was chased by about 20 skinheads determined to kill me. It was terrifying, but I ran faster than Betty Cuthbert on cocaine to the safety of a cab. Phew. It was really very scary. At this time, I joined the production of Jesus Christ Superstar. I thought I had been miscast playing a minor apostle, a leper, and a soldier that pierces Jesus' side. Of course, I knew I was Messiah material. It was a unique experience for me, and so soon after my hell in the psychiatric snake pit. The Melbourne production was staged at the stunning Palais Theatre in St Kilda. One night I thought I would show the director how versatile I could be, so I dragged up the beginnings of my Magda persona, wearing far too much blue eyeshadow, dangly earrings, and fire-engine red lipstick for the song What's the Buzz? Well, they did have drag queens in Jesus' day, an historical point I thought they'd obviously overlooked. The stage director, Bert Cooper, was none too happy, but I think Jesus liked it. My vast talent was being underutilised, though I was an exceptional leper and always cleaned up after myself. I recall one summer evening at interval, a sight I will never forget. All the apostles in their costumes sitting on the steep steps of the outside fire escape of the Palais, passing reefers up and down to each other. I thought, don't tell Jesus. Or is that how they saw God? No. I was bored and staged a couple more pranks, the last of which ended my short but brilliant career with Andrew Lloyd Webber. So I'm standing there with my cue to pierce Jesus' side, and Jesus, under his breath, whispers, "Bloody finish me off, Tim." But instead I collapsed in a faint upon Golgotha, sword rolling down that mechanical mountain, all eyes upon me, not on the Lord. And the curtain comes down abruptly, and I'm carried off stage. "You stole the show, Tim, you naughty boy." My fainting throw was very convincing, and Marsha Hines, Rachel Livermore, and others rushed to my side. I was summoned to the director's office. "Tim, you're a fine singer, but you seem to be in a world of your own, and there have been a couple of incidents. I'm afraid we are going to have to let you go." "Oh, thank you, Bert, thank you." The cast were bereft, of course, and Marsha gave me a big hug and said, "You're great, Tim, you should get your own show." I thought I might just do that, Marsha. I met Michael in 1973, the boy in the pink satin shirt with Michael monogrammed in blue above his heart. We met at the notorious Woolshed Bar in Collins Street, Melbourne, colloquially known as the Snake Pit, a gay dive straight out of a William Burroughs novel. that attracted gay hustlers, queens and crims. It was fabulous. Michael and I arrived home at about 7 a.m. and my father opened the door in his pyjamas pissed. My father blurted out, "Look at you two poofters, you got shit on the end of your dicks." And then proceeded to throw a punch at Michael. We ran upstairs, followed by Dad. He threw another punch, and we ran downstairs and out of the house, heading for the bus stop, with Dad running after us. But his gym jams kept falling down. It was like a slapstick scene from Keystone Cops, although there was nothing funny about it at the time. We hop on the bus, Dad is still following us. His gym jams are still falling down. He hops in a passing cab. The bus stops at the local police station. Dad gets on the bus with a policeman and in slurred speech pronounces, "There are two poofters on this bus, you got to put them in jail." I held on to Michael's hand as immense panic overwhelmed me. Then the policeman said, "Now come on, Mr. McKew, you've had a few too many. Get off the bus now." I didn't return home for 2 days. Mum let me in quietly as Dad was watching the football, and I went to my bedroom. Shortly after, the door opened and Dad came to my bedside and knelt down. In floods of tears, he said to me, he was sorry. "I don't understand, son. I don't understand." I woke the next morning as if a heavy veil had lifted. This was the first day of the rest of my strife. And this was about the time when I started raiding my mother's wardrobe. Mum was a great beauty, and in her youth modelled for one of Melbourne's most exclusive houses of couture, Le Louvre, and had an extraordinary collection of 1940s ball gowns and suits, a goldmine for a gay son. I commandeered most of these gowns over a 2-month period, and Mum didn't notice anything at first. But one evening, all Chanel broke loose. I was off to a gay party, fitted out in Mum's feather boa and satin evening gown. I came downstairs and rang a taxi in full drag. Then Mum walked into the dining room, and the shock on her face resembled the shower scene from Psycho. "Take that off, that's my boa and dress." "I'm going out, Mum." "You could be put in jail for impersonating a woman." "I'm not impersonating a woman, I'm going out as you." "Don't you think I look lovely, Mum?" "You'll be the death of me." High on Black Russians, a 70s cocktail, and too many reefers, I returned from Scotty's Parkville party and promenaded down Main Street, Port Melbourne, like Ava Gardner in On the Beach. The police picked me up and threw me into the back of a divvy van, smacked me around a bit and put me in the jail for the night, saying, "Your father, Pat McKew, wouldn't want a homo for a son." I enrolled at Melbourne Teachers College to study drama and do further studies in music and dance. It was there I met the young playwright Louis Nara and his then partner, the now celebrated composer, Sarah Dion. Louis was an excellent lyricist and Sarah composed wonderful sublime melodies for his Brechtian-style songs, songs of the brutality and fragility of love. And they asked me to perform with them. With Sarah on the piano and Louis on the clarinet, we did a number of venues, including a season at the legendary Flying Trapeze Cafe in Fitzroy, run by the equally legendary impresario John Pinder. It was thrilling. I was their Lottie Lenya in a big red dress. The season was a hit. Magda, my female persona, was emerging, and they were the Brecht and Vile of Melbourne. Months later, after jamming with Wendy Sannington in my mother's wedding dress, I decided never to return to Teachers College again. The performing bug was back. I met David Evans in 1974 at a gay venue called the Dover Hotel. David was a 6'4" Botticelli angel, and we became lovers very quickly. Not that quickly. I brought him home, and my mother thought he was a girl, which was fine by me. David was studying at the Melbourne Conservatorium of Music and was a remarkable pianist. Sarah and Louis had been drawn away by the project, so I asked David if he would like to be my new pianist, and he said, "Sure, I'd like that." In 75, we did our first gig at Paul Craft's Faraday Gallery in Carlton. Paul was Melbourne's Andy Warhol. he drew many gay artists to his fold. We were to cap off an exhibition and art party. I performed the Louis Nair and Sarah Dion repertoire to a whole new audience. "This is more New York than Stade Melbourne," David McDermott said. "They would love you in New York. You are so New York dolls." Later that year at Paul's Gallery, I modelled in Australian fashion designer Jenny Bannister's first fashion parade. The night was mesmeric, replete with Jenny's underwater-inspired fishnet ensembles, crocodile skin suits, and futuristic leather space outfits. It was November, and we were all in disbelief at the dismissal of Prime Minister Gough Whitlam, and a whole bunch of us turned up to a huge rally in the city square. You betcha, we had righteous anger. The whole country did. My political awareness was growing. I penned an anti-Fraser ditty, which I performed a number of times during this period. "Fraser, get the blazers out of Parliament House. You're not welcome there, you're a liberal louse." I rarely performed in the gay venues of Melbourne, as I wasn't a drag queen, in the traditional sense. I was a singer, a balladeer, more a punk chanteuse activist, who often performed in drag. Dressed like some 1940s mink and sequined film noir femme fatale, or appearing on stage as a brooding Valentino, hair slicked back and ready for the kill. I am, a queer cabaret activist and satirist, a disturber of the dominant paradigm. I believed in taking my performances to the public square, to the coalface, to the people literally, performing on the streets of Melbourne, to the university campuses, including gay liberation dances at Melbourne Uni and RMIT, and also to the art galleries and burgeoning comedy venues, but generally not to the mainstream gay venues of Melbourne, where often my work was misunderstood and not accepted in those early days. I wanted people to think, not just drink. I was a proud queer artist, yes, there to entertain, but also to inform with my songs of protest and social political satire. I wanted to break down the misconceptions and the stereotypes that the straight world and sometimes the gay world had of who we are. For we are as diverse a community as the stars above us. I don't have sour grapes about this. It was just the way it was. Melbourne was very conservative, and I was often vilified in those early days, of course, by the mainstream, but also by the conservatives within the queer community here. But never in Sydney. Interesting. They said I was too weird, too dark, too political. Oh, I do like a tutu. I was a gay anarchist, still am, an iconoclast. They've called me a tall poppy, or was that a robust pansy? But never a shrinking violet. And every time they cut me down, I would grow back taller and stronger. And often I would receive scathing press notices, which I wore as badges of honor. People say I was ahead of my time, a trailblazer, who was often told to go to blazes. A pioneer, or was that a pio-queer? It is interesting and confirming that the style of performance I was doing back 40 years ago, here in Australia, and often lampooned for, is emerging more and more today. I'm so pleased to have caught up with me. In '76, I moved into a dilapidated mansion in Port Melbourne called Gainsborough House, with its then younger occupant, Stephen Hill. I had known the house since I was 12. I'd run out of Sunday Mass one morning and found myself in front of this edifice. There it was, like Miss Havisham's house, in great expectations. A house lost in time, and I was to become Pip a decade later. The landlady's name was Miss Lillian Blanche McPhail, a grand old petite lady of 88, rattling around in this lofty palace. The house became a magnet for many artists, queer and otherwise, musicians, eccentrics, fashion designers, models, photographers, art dealers and wheeler-dealer feelers. The constant flow of people included Nick Cave, Howard Arkley, Jenny Bannister, Henry Talbot, Peter Havington, Margot Gray Anwar, Rennie Ellis, and William Mora, amongst many others. Why, even the band Blondie visited the house for a cup of tea, as my friend Deb Thomas was having a fling with the drummer, Clem Burke. The house had played host to many famous people in its golden years, while the Duke and Duchess of York are reputed to have visited the house in 1927. These were the days when there were no festivals, no Mardi Gras, no comedy, no Midsummer, no Fringe, no Sydney or Melbourne festivals. We were the festival. These were the halcyon days of the 70s, pre-AIDS, and we were the bright young things, the alternative artists of our time, the counter cultural queers and other dears. In 76, we were invited to do a season at the newly opened Foible City restaurant in Carlton. It was an old, disused hall that had its interior transformed into a kind of mosque on acid, hand-painted walls and ceiling, with gaudy colours, with ducks and other fantastic creatures entwined, with vines and legs poking out of the walls and ceiling. I came out in my Rudolph Valentino valence as I danced on stage with a headless dummy that was wearing my mother's ubiquitous wedding dress. I called her my headless mummy and sang to her Noel Coward's Nina, a witty tango number. In 76, we also played Mietta's, a fine dining institution in Fitzroy at that time. English actress Susanna York was in the front row. I don't think I'd ever sung better, and Susanna certainly inspired my tango dancing. She was charming and most complimentary, saying, "I'll remember this night. You remind me of Dolores Del Rio," and gave me a peck on the cheek. They will adore you in London. The wanderlust to leave these fatal shores was growing. Melbourne had many gay and mixed bars, such as the Australia Hotel Snake Pit, the Graham, the University Club, and the Prince of Wales, amongst others, and a number of gay saunas. In that year, I joined a home gay group called Gay Rap, run by my friend and sometimes lover, Gordon Doak. Gordon, a bodybuilder, had recently come out. It was a safe place for like-minded political queers to meet and discuss issues, rather than always being around alcohol and smoky bars. At this time, I staged Nacht music at the Flying Trapeze, accompanied by David Evans on the Ivories. Wunderbar! We got free tickets to see the band Blondie perform in the Victorian coal mining town of Morwell. Way out Whoop Whoop. This was their first Australian tour. About a half a dozen of us piled into a car, including Vanessa Davies, Darling Stephen Hill, Jenny Bannister, Deb Thomas and myself, all in our plastic ball gowns and jumpsuits, and ready for a night to remember. We had consumed various euphorics back at the old mansion earlier. It was so surreal, Blondie in a coal mining town in country Victoria. We arrived at the venue, Morwell Technical College, and the place was packed. We sure made an entrance to a room full of young country bucks. It must have looked like the aliens had landed. We were decked out like the cast of the Jetsons. The skinheads left us alone, thank goodness. They must have thought we were an apparition. My extreme costuming has saved me a number of times when Morlocks were present. It was a fantastic night. We were delirious, bathing in Deborah Harry's voice and delicious lyrics, and the grooves of this yet relatively unknown band. Deborah was the gorgeous punk femme fatale of the 70s and beyond. We all went backstage and had champagne with Deborah and the guys. She was so sweet. How was the sound? Could you hear the lyrics clearly? You were divine, darling. We all went back to the 2-story blonde brick 60s motel where they were billeted, just out of town in the middle of nowhere on the edge of a paddock. It was like a set from a John Waters movie. We waved goodbye with Deborah and Ban waving back from their second-story wrought iron balcony, an image indelibly printed. I came to Sydney soon after, as I was invited to open Arthur's nightclub in Potts Point, a very glam affair, with an Italian opera singer singing Santa Lucia on the upstairs level, and moi simultaneously doing my parody of it, Ave Maria Whitehouse. All covered by Rennie Ellis, the fashion photographer for Mode magazine at that time. It's amazing how active and prolific I was in my 20s. In '78, I was a part of an art installation at Talona Gallery St Kilda, created by artist Ray Woolard, called The Dog Show, which was loosely based on Pavlov's experiments. I wrote the script and composed 2 songs for this dark performance piece. I met Nick Cave at the art school Caulfield Tech Melbourne. I was modelling for the art classes, which I did for 30 years at various art schools and societies, in between gigs. These were the early days of the punk scene in Australia, and folks, punk is a verb, never a noun. Nick dropped out of art school and started gigging about town with his newly formed band, The Boys Next Door. The punk scene adopted me as one of their own. I worked a lot in the punk scene from '77 through to the early '80s. I found the punk and post-punk scene a perfect fit for my Magda's anarchic and satirical cabarets. I joined the throng of the anti-establishment punks, where sexuality was very fluid and gender blurred. Many alternative queers were attracted to the punk scene, and like me, often found it more accepting of our various styles than the sometimes conservative mainstream gay culture of Melbourne. The Melbourne punk scene was one of the most exciting on the global map at that time, with a number of permanent venues such as the Tiger Lounge, the Seaview Ballroom in the Grand George Hotel St Kilda, run by various people including Dolores San Miguel and Laurie Richards, rest in peace. It was an extraordinary venue, a backdrop of crumbling Victorian grandeur for the countercultural punk iconoclasts. We were going to rip down the social order and change the world. My marauding Magda had supported a number of bands there, such as Paul Kelly and the Dots and The Chosen Few. I remember one night in '79 at the Seaview, I was booked to support Nick Cave and the Boys Next Door. Marauding Magda, in her green satin 40s dress, goose steps on stage singing the Alabama song. Oh, show me the way to the next little punk. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. Show me the way to the next little punk. Oh, don't ask why. Oh, don't ask why. And this song segues into the next song, The Crystal Ship by the Doors. An angry young punk rushes up to the stage and yells, "You can't sing Jim Morrison songs, you're not Jim Morrison." And Magda swiftly rejoins, "No, I am Magda Morrison, and there are the Doors." I loved the intensity and fabulous friction that Magda could often create at these gigs. And interestingly, I never experienced any homophobic abuse from these punk audiences. Nick was a big fan of Magda and invited her to come on tour with him to Berlin. Magda, wisely or not so wisely, replied, "Thanks, darling, been there, done that," as she had toured Germany extensively just recently. Magda figured the drugs those boys took would have done her in. Marauding Magda also appeared at an anarchic Australia Day punk bash in '78 on the banks of the Yarra called Rock for the Dole, organised by Lionel Curtis. Hello, Lionel, who's here today or not. The Dole Bludgers were fighting back. Marauding Magda was on the bill with the band Jab, with members including Ash Wednesday, hi Ash, Johnny Crash and Bodan X. And the Teenage Radio Stars also played that day. Meanwhile, marauding Magda's more elegant twin sister, Magda Givenchy Gavotte, performed at Paul Craft's new art gallery, Paraphernalia, at the Paris end of fashionable Collins Street. I put the idea to Paul of doing a queer performance art piece in the gallery window facing Collins Street. It would be a social, political, and fashion satire entitled The Ladies Who Lunch. It would be a week of midday lunchtime performances in the gallery window, which was tricked up to look like a restaurant with the name Two Fannies. I commenced my performance art piece in the upmarket Ladies' Emporium, George's. The ground floor ground to a halt as Magda sachets and poses by the Dior counter and cavorts her way around this most elegant of establishments with her personal paparazzi, Scott Lawrence, photographing her every move. "Who is she?" I could hear one lady in black saying. "She must be foreign," said another. Magda then throws herself into the Gucci cage for her crimes of glamour, for her grand finale. Then this glamourist, like a Paris fashion model, walks the catwalk that was once Collins Street to the gallery to continue the performance. How much is that drag queen in the window? Poof, poof, the one with the waggly tail. How much is that drag queen in the window? Poof, poof, I do hope that drag queen's for sale. Throw more money. You see, one can be serious and have fun at the same time. It's important to have that balance. This was a show of old world glamour and anarchy. Let's call it Glamarchy. There is a house in Paris, France, they call Christian Dior. It's been the ruin of many a socialite and many expensive whore. You can clap again. Oh, I haven't had the clap for years. Sorry, I know it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. It's primal. I'm primal. I can see there's a few primals out there. This performance is peppered with humour, pathos, and songs against homophobia, hate, and stupidity, against right-wing campaigners such as Mary Whitehouse and Fred Nile. Ave Maria Whitehouse, Ave Maria Whitehouse, straight from the divine lighthouse. Ave Maria Whitehouse, she is so clever, craving for leather. Ave Maria Whitehouse, don't Bible bash me to death. Thank you. Queer cabaret in the middle of the CBD, in the middle of the day in 1978? Well, I never. Well, I actually did. Magda stopped traffic as crowds gathered around the window, mesmerised. The press had a field day and lapped it up. I'm not equating one with the other, but it is an interesting time parallel that just as the protesters of 1978's Gay Solidarity Group were taking their demand for change to Sydney's Oxford Street, Magda was on Melbourne's Collins Street with an urgent cry for social change and equality. As quoted from the 1978 first Mardi Gras, "We were out of the bars and onto the streets, you betcha." In November, we descended on the Melbourne Cup, Punk Magda, together with Paul Craft, Ewan Smith, Mike Lachlan, Deb Thomas, Ray Woolard, and Margot Gray-Anwar and other art anarchists, fashion deconstructors. We were a Dadaist troupe in fantastic costumes and art hats. We stole the limelight. I was interviewed and caricatured in the next day's Melbourne Sun News pictorial by Keith Dunstan and cartoonist Jeff Hook. And we made it to the cover of the Bulletin. Dave and I were brought up to Sydney by Johnny Allen to perform at Garibaldi's as a part of Cabaret Conspiracy, which was a fantastic troupe of Sydney performers, including Fifi L'Amour, Simon Reptile, and Fingers Lamont, amongst others. My photographer friend, Peter Havington, and I had a brainstorm to do a performance art photographic exhibition art happening. The Collins Street performance and this larger concept were some of the first performance art gallery events staged in Australia. We went to see the charming William Moore at Tolano Galleries in St Kilda. The Moores, as you know, are a famous Australian arts family. George and Mirka were Jewish refugees and escaped the Nazis during the Second World War and made their way across the seas to Melbourne, where they brought with them their bohemian Parisian culture to this very grey, monotone Melbourne of the 50s, and established themselves as gallerists, artists, and restaurateurs. William was their third son. This show was to be William Moore's very first show, his debut, and what a debut. The event was to be called Come Down With Us. I created 4 separate shows, each with different sets created by artist Paul Cater and costume designed by Jenny Bannister. I wrote the lyrics for about 30 songs, and David composed the music, and Henry Vinell would complete the trio with violin. A little more martini. Wearable hat sculptures would be created by artist Graham Hare. Peter Havington would photograph me in all the various costumes and characters, and a photographic exhibition of these Dadaist beings would adorn the gallery walls. In the medium of light boxes, frame photos, and wonderful collages of me created by Vanessa, also known as Troy Davies, the subject of Richard Lowenstein's documentary film entitled Echo Homo. Vanessa was also one of my cigarette girls in a black tulle tutu and makeup of defiance. This was an ensemble extraordinaire, and a different cake sculpture would be served to the guests at the close of each show. The shows were photographically documented by Julie Higginbotham and Henry Talbot, who had been in partnership with Helmut Newton, with Rennie Ellis being the snappy paparazzi. The gallery was packed with notables such as Ivan Durant, Howard Arkley, and Lulu Pincus at the inaugural night. Mirka and Georges were enthralled. The first performance art piece was Egypt versus Berlin, a black satire on megalomania and sexuality, where I am dressed as half Cleopatra and half Hitler. Nothing complex, mind you. Cleopatra, via the power of the pyramids, travels through time, arrives in Berlin, is mesmerized by the evil Führer. She murders Eva Braun, builds pyramids along the Rhine, and changes the course of history, and there's no war. Alas, she soon tires of Adolf and gives him the asp, and becomes Queen of Germany. The second performance art piece was the Harold Holt Show, also known as Sailors on the Waterfront, a satire on political myths and the mythology of the sea. Harold Holt doesn't drown at all, but is rescued by a feisty mermaid named Tuna Falls Serena, me, decked out in my green plastic-scaled mermaid's ensemble and hot pink queer Bermuda Triangle hat. All these performances were packed out with a line of hopeful attendees going down Fitzroy Street. There had never been anything quite like this in Melbourne's art world before. We were making history and having lots of fun doing it. Yay! Yay! She gets it. Oh, yes. Train them young, train them young. In fact, half the audience, this is not in the script, half the audience at these shows were children around 10 to 15. Because all my friends brought their children, they absolutely loved it. And yes, it was very memorable having kids there. Child-friendly? I definitely am. Anyone who was anyone was there. Even Zara Holt vied for a ticket. Sometime later, my mermaid ended up in the tabloid girly sports paper, The Truth, where my Swans footballer brother, Shane, had often featured in its sports pages. We were Mark of the Day and Fish of the Day. My father was inebriated often during these periods. The third show was entitled House Hunting, a black satire on urban neuroses and conformity, presented by Da Da Duck, who sings the songs Love Affair in the Burbs and the Narrow House Blues. And Brickman responds with his song, Brick Venereal Disease. Brick venereal disease. When you're in your Volvo, you travel with these. But my legs, they have turned to drain pipes. Oh, my cleric love gripes. My eyelashes to awnings to shade me from dawnings. I was built in Doncaster. What a disaster! My true act and makeup has turned into plaster. Oh, you're too kind. We do love kindness. Yes, well, Doncaster was a new satellite suburb at that time. And so yes, it was very appropriate with the burbs were encroaching. The fourth and final show was the 1982 Stiletto Heel Take It Off, my satire on my all-time favourite, the Catholic Church. Lampooning that institution with an irreverent, Dada-esque performance art piece where I was a nun sent by God from the battleship Basilica encircling the earth, with a message of hope for mankind. Arriving on earth, she has her own transfiguration, with flashing crucifixes in her shoulder pads. Sister Fallopia of the Bleeding Heart would transport her congregation to a paradise of no homophobia or social or religious persecution. Attacking the moral hypocrites within the church, an institution that has brought the queer communities on earth so much suffering. Sister Fallopia sings The Bible Bash and I've Got a Lovely Bunch of Pederasts. I was watching TV news late one night when my eyes beheld a dreadful sight. It is all about religion in the USA, and Australia to reform is going all the way. They do the bash, they do the Bible bash, they do the bash, and then they take your cash, they do the bash. It was an instant smash, they do the bash, they do the Bible bash. Out from his coffin, Bertrand Russell did spring. Seems he was troubled by just one thing. Opened the lid and shook his fist and said, what's become of all those former humanists? They know a bash, they do the Bible bash, they know a bash, and then they take your cash, they do the bash. It was an instant smash, they do the bash, they do the Bible bash. Tammy and Jimmy Baker were having fun with Gypsy Rose Lee and an ombudsman. The party was wild with that escort so mild. Hang on it, Jimmy, she could be your child. And Tammy lashed, she did the Bible bash, and Tammy lashed. And then she took your cash, and Tammy lashed. Then she took your cash, and Tammy lashed. She did the Bible bash. Get your racket off my balls, Margaret Court. You're a hateful homophobe, a nasty sort. Your Pentecostalism is based on hate. Try serving love before it's too late. And Tammy lashed, we do the Bible bash, and then she lashed. And then she'll take your cash, and then they lashed. And then they take your cash, they do the bash. They do the Bible bash. False prophets in false eyelashes, false prophets in false eyelashes, false prophets in false eyelashes, false prophets. During the photo shoot for this part of the show, Peter Havenden and I went to St Patrick's Cathedral. With me and my full nun's mufti wearing my Fellini-esque black tulle habit adorned with fluoro golf balls for rosary beads, and glowing crosses shimmering from my black veil. I was on the ecclesiastical stage for God to see, floating down the grand tessellated nave of that cathedral, glowing in the sacred shadows of that vast vault. I posed by a basalt pillar, hands stretched to the heavens, looking beatific. It was around 5:30 p.m., the time for the evening service, but all eyes of the parishioners were transfixed on this otherworldly Sister Fashionista. All this time, my papal paparazzi Peter is clicking away, capturing the extraordinary scene. An elderly woman in black calls to me, "Sister, what order are you from?" I reply, "Disorder, my child, disorder." I do the sign of the cross and float back down the nave, eyes heavenwards, and hands in a prayerful pose. I bless myself at the holy water font, and the performance finishes. We return to Gainsborough House, and as I open the door, a globe of the world falls upon my head. Peter remarks, "Maybe God thought you were being a bit naughty that time, take that." I reply, "No, Peter, God is giving me the world." All I can say is that this show was a religious experience for one and all. Journalist Kate Legg did a review in Melbourne University's Farrago Press, and the shows were also covered in Australian Vogue by Lee Tulloch. Goodbye, fatal shores, Northern Hemisphere, here I come. Farewell performances are staged at Melbourne University, RMIT, and the Last Laugh Theatre Restaurant. And our final Australian farewell shows were held in Sydney's Palms on Oxford Street. The shows were enthusiastically received, and I remember comforting a gay punk with a mohawk at its close. He was crying uncontrollably, because he was so overcome by my performance. I told him he was having an epiphany, and I might order one of those at the bar myself. It's funny the things you remember. Leaving on the Hindenburg, don't know if I'll be back again. This parody was going round and round in my head as our plane took to the skies heading for London and Europe. We left Malcolm Fraser's Australia to arrive in Margaret Thatcher's England. Eek! We did quite a few shows in London, including the famous Blitz Club in Covent Garden, the post-punk demi-monde where David Bowie frequented, and a very young boy George was in situ that night of my show, before he was famous. The show was covered by English Vogue. There were gigs at Monkberry's, an exclusive West End club in Jermyn Street owned by Arabs, and the Comedy Store in Soho. Whilst in town, my pianist David Evans and I were invited to play on one of the tracks of the English band King Crimson. But it turned out that this was partly a ruse for the producer to get into David's pants. David. Yes, well, I won't go there. We only just tapped into London's gay political movement at that time, but later fully immersed ourselves in those movements of Germany and Holland. In England, Thatcher's government's clause were up for Clause 28, making it illegal for local government to condone or support homosexuality. However, the world was changing. It was the beginning of the 80s, and our global gay culture was being born. We arrived in Amsterdam, blissful open Amsterdam, that city of canals with its colourful gay bars and cafes. What a relief after old Blight. We were most warmly welcomed into the gay community of that city. They were passionate, political, and optimistic for the future. David and I were booked to perform at one of Amsterdam's first major gay festivals, the Flicker Festival, Faggot Festival. They were reclaiming the word faggot as we have now reclaimed the word queer. The event was called Menem Netmoir, an event of post-feminist, post-disco, neo-faggot masculinity. It was held at the Melkweg, a famous Amsterdam venue still operating today. And whilst there, we had the honour of supporting the ska band Madness as my half Cleopatra and half Führer character at the Paradiso. And we had a special performance at the Apple Art Gallery also. The Dutch loved us. They called us the Gay Kangaroos. And we performed at every gay festival the width and breadth of that small country, including Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Utrecht, The Hague, and Friesland. We were amongst some of the first Australian artists to stage a show at the famous Spiegel tent in Holland, a decade and more before it came down under. Berlin, Berlin, burlesque and sin. Our success had spread to Germany. We were invited to bring our Australian gay cabaret to the inaugural Gay International All-Stars Festival in Berlin. The Berlin Festival was held in the Tempodrome, a vast circus tent, slap dab against the Berlin Wall that seated 3,000 people. I was on cloud 9. The German gay movement was as highly politically mobilized as the Dutch. One cannot forget the atrocities inflicted on Dutch and German homosexuals throughout that hellish World War II. Berlin was one of the most sophisticated and sexually liberated cities in the world before the war. We met a couple of German cabaret artists on the bill, Kurt and Bert, whose fathers had been in the SS. It was especially powerful for these homosexual artists to be out and proud in the new Germany of that time. It felt such an honor to be performing in the cabaret genre in Berlin, one of the cities famous for its tradition of social political cabaret. The Germans were ecstatic when I appeared on the back of an elephant dressed as a mermaid, singing West of the Wall. West of the wall, I'll wait for you. West of the wall, our dreams will all come true. It's still a bit funny, doesn't matter, does it? I sometimes pitch things a little too low. Never mind. Resonance is sexy. Alas, I have no photos of my time on the elephant. The elephant lost my trunk. Because in those days, we didn't have mobile phones and very few people had cameras. But I'm sure that there's probably some photos somewhere in some Berliner's archive. We received much love and encores that night. We were the toast of many gay festivals in Deutschland, playing Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, Bremen, Bremerhaven, Düsseldorf, and Buxtehude, where we performed for the very first Greens Party Festival event on the outskirts of Hamburg. The hungry Huns wouldn't let us leave the stage, yelling, "Kangaroos, kangaroos," and a more of encores. We left Berlin playing at the punk alternative music venue Excess, that's 2 X's and 2 S's, on Kurfürstendammstraße. It was packed with queers and punks. It seemed everyone wanted to see Tim und David Gay Kangaroos. After our stellar success under the big top, as I descended into the room from the stage stairs, I was halfway through the first stanza of Heartbreak Hotel when a deep, resonant female voice gurgled up from the darkness. As I drew closer to its source, I almost fell off my high heels. The voice was Nina Hagen. Nina got up and jammed with me on the rest of the song. She thought we were crazy kangaroos. I was in punk heaven, or was that hell? What a way to finish our German tour. Auf Wiedersehen, Deutschland. When we returned to Australia, however, we were banned from performing at Gay Day in 1981 here in Melbourne. The organisers physically blocked us from getting on the stage. "You're not performing here. We don't like what you do. You're weird." David and I were stunned and left Olympic Park not saying a word, in disbelief at what had just happened after our giddying success in Europe. Welcome back to parochial Melbourne. The Hamer Liberal government of Victoria had repealed the state sodomy laws, and in 1981, homosexuality was finally decriminalised in our state. There were celebrations across our communities. One could sense the yoke of many millennia of oppression, ignorance and hate start to lift from our collective queer shoulders. There was a palpable shift. Our physical act of love is not a crime, nor is it a sin, but a gift. All love is a gift that we share with each other. David Evans and I then teamed up with the effervescent and most talented Ruth Schoenheimer to stage the production Tango con Fuoco at the Flying Trapeze Theatre Restaurant, under new management with Miss Capability Karen Marks. My Sydney manager Johnny Allen brought us up to Sydney to do the Sydney season, when cabaret comet Fifi L'Amour enters my world with a second season of The Flytrap with Something's Cooking. Fifi was remarkable and had worked with Lindsay Kemp and was one of the founders of Sydney's groundbreaking cabaret conspiracy. We were off to Nimbin to terrorise the hippies. What fun doing our coastal cabaret tour, including Byron Bay, Lismore, Mullumbimby and Casino, an unfortunate name for a town. One of the highlights being Fifi entering a camel race like Florence of Arabia, and my bent Cleopatra Hitler character drawing a standing ovation from a church hall full of male prisoners from the local Alcatraz. The times, they are a-changing. David theatrically elopes with Fifi, and our long career together ends. But it was a natural conclusion of things, and I score a $10,000 Australia Council grant to do my long-awaited musical, An Eye for an Eye. A musical satire mixing Greek mythology and popular culture, where Oedipus Rex meets Yoko Ono, meets Argus, and the goddess Hera meets Ayatollah Khomeini. And all singing all Dada-esque cavalcade. Introducing some of my new faces, some of my new backing girls. Wendy Harmer, Gina Riley, and Wendy DeWild. This was before fame came and snatched them from my grasp. With Jeffrey O'Connell, pianist and arranger, Henry Vinyl on violin, I wrote the book and wrote and composed the original songs. It was musical dada on the big stage. I don't think I've ever had so much publicity since, with radio, print and TV media gorging on it. But it was a bloodbath of critiques too. It was obviously too out there for Nellie Melbourne at that time. And houses were small, but it was a creative tour de force for this 26-year-old. We depart the old mansion in Port Melbourne with the death of Miss McPhail at 93 and leave the crumbling pile with sadness. The end of an era. I sang at her funeral at the Pentecostal church she belonged to, the Assemblies of God in Richmond, and the pastor said, "Someone will take over from where Miss McPhail left off," and I spookily knew that was me. I moved into Pat Healy's literary lodgings in Parade. Pat had been director of the Literature Board of the Australia Council and was a cohort of Hilary McPhee and got drunk with Ava Gardner. And soon after, the news came of my mother's death, to be followed hurriedly by my father's. This was a time of great upheaval for me, and I decided after a year to move cities, to Tinseltown, to Sydney. Staying with my older gay brother, Michael, in Glebe, above his decorative art shop, Aha Dodo. I entered the Channel 10 talent competition Star Search and won with my original song, The Office of Love. Restless and somewhat directionless, I ended back at the crime scene in Melbourne a year later. Sydney just wasn't the right fit at that time. Sweethearts. Ah, romantic love. For some, a dangerous cocktail. It was the name of my writer friend, rest in peace, Colin Talbot's movie, and I was invited to perform in the cabaret scene, once again singing The Office of Love that Colin adored, a wonderfully quirky movie that made it to the San Sebastian Film Festival and often appears over the holiday periods when they boost their Australian content. My song was considered a highlight. I bought my home in 1990 and enjoyed success with Tim McKew's Cabaret Combo, enjoying performing the American Songbook and many great composers of the 20s through to the 50s. I know my mother would have enjoyed this music very much. She didn't approve the sometimes risque and to her ears weird material of my 20s. But this was the popular music she grew up with, the songs of Gershwin, Porter, Hoagie Carmichael and more. AIDS rampaged through our queer communities in the 90s. We lost so many friends and family. Our diverse communities galvanized and supported each other in a way they had never done before or since. I performed at many HIV/AIDS awareness raising and fundraising events over that challenging decade, including fundraisers for the Positive Living Centre and Style Aid, a remarkable fashion event where many big name labels came together to raise money for AIDS research, staged at the Hyatt, and sang at the closing of the HIV/AIDS ward at Fairfield Hospital, and at the memorial for Doris Fish, a powerhouse drag queen political activist who died of AIDS and whose life was celebrated at Sydney's Kinsellas in 1991. The Continental was Melbourne's most stylish music dinner and show venue, and I staged my Jacques Chirac show there. For the Melbourne International Comedy Festival of '96, there were global protests against the nuclear testing on Mururoa Atoll, and many here in Oz. I got my protest satirical cabaret chops onto it and put together the Jacques Chirac Cabaret, appearing as Maurice Chevalier, singing such cutting ditties as "Thank heavens for little bombs, for little bombs get bigger every day," and songs about radiation and imperialism. Nothing heavy, mind. In '98, I performed a series of historic gay cabaret shows in Shanghai. I did this under the radar without permission from the Cultural Bureau. Needless to say, they would never have officially allowed an openly gay performer to do an unsanctioned public cabaret in China. I was billed as Mardi Gras comes to China. So I decided to bring out their social reformer, the Dowager Empress Cixi, back to life, to encourage the gay community of Shanghai to be bold, saying to them one day they will have their own Mardi Gras through the streets of Shanghai. This declaration received deafening applause, and then Cixi sings, "Not Mao way, but my way. And now I face the Iron Curtain." I even sang my anti-Pauline Hanson song in my male valence for my audience, which caused hysteria amongst the expats. I felt most humbled to be a voice of freedom from the West, and the underground queer Chinese community flocked to the shows. The authorities knew there was a subversive gay artist in town, but all our publicity was underground, and they never knew where I was going to appear next. Well, neither did I. I had heard that the authorities were accusing me of promoting homosexuality in China. Who, me? Never. Some friends in Melbourne were sure I would be arrested. With my season over, I skedaddled out of the country quickly. Within 24 hours, my host, Miss Lee, was interrogated but released. Catch Tim McKew? No. Rennie Ellis wrote a most amusing article on me when I returned with a rather cheeky headline, as you can see above, entitled Tim's Missionary Position. I dropped dead at the start of 2000. What a way to start the new millennium. Cigarettes, depression, and pokies will do that to you. But the paramedic angels brought me back to life. I had a heart attack, but no, it didn't kill me. Yes, I was a goner. I'd been in cardiac arrest for about 6 minutes or so, till the paramedics revived me. It was a miracle. That fat lady just wasn't fat enough. It was a life-changing event. I kicked the smokes, the pokes, and the dopes, and recorded my first CD, Lazarus. Cardiac Cabaret. A little heart-stopper of a show. Mostly original material, with songs about Vivian Lee, paranoia, my heart attack, called Don't Lose Heart, and a ballad about the death of Princess Diana. Diana the huntress, but oh what a sadness, last fairy tale princess, killed on Prime TV. Diana the huntress, and on with the conquest, an ocean of flowers for the part you had to play. Oh, the price that's paid for power, oh, the price that's paid for fame. Princess, in your ivory tower, princess, what a deadly game. Life is a cabaret, it's just an old Greek play. And what did the Sphinx say? The fortunes of mankind are fleeting. Life is a cabaret, it's just an old Greek play. And everyone must pay, from Caesar to Coco Chanel. Oh, the price that's paid for power, oh, the price that's paid for fame. Hunted for a photograph, the hunt that was a deadly game. Oh, the price that's paid for power, oh, the price that's paid for fame. Hunted for a photograph, the hunt that was a deadly game. Diana the huntress, and on with the conquest, lost fairy tale princess, killed on Prime TV. It's Prime TV. It's Prime TV. It's Prime TV. They played my song on the BBC with the 20th anniversary of Diana's death, which was a lovely accolade for the song. Noel Coward was one of the most illustrious homosexuals of the 20th century. He took over my life in 2005. The great-great-grandson of Buckley and Nunn was having a 40th wedding anniversary at the Australian Club, and my agent called and asked if I had a Coward show up my sleeve. It's up my sleeve and down my trouser leg. I will put a program together. I had 2 months and put together a concert presentation of a selection of Coward, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, of course, London Pride, Let's Do It, etc., with minimal repartee. It was enough to do the songs well, and while they went, the audience were as merry as grigs. The next month, I wrote the book, a cabaret theatre production about the life of Coward, a season presented during Melbourne's Commonwealth Games, or as I penned them, the Empire Games. A season at the Incinerator Arts Centre Moonee Ponds, a building designed in the 30s by Walter Burley Griffin, that was originally a public incinerator, that to my eyes resembled an Incan temple. What fun! I do like a dash of human sacrifice, especially critics. I did and do like putting new dialogue into Coward's mouth. While he was always up to the minute, he was such a keen observer of social, lower, upper, and sideways. The archetypes are still the same today, but instead of the Barbara Huttons, we have the vacuous reality TV stars of Kim Kardashian and Paris Hilton. Would someone please send an assassin to Kim Kardashian? And don't put your daughter on X Factor, Mrs. Worthington. The Coward Show has toured the country with much acclaim, from Restaurant Casino to High Tea with Noel Coward in the Grand Ballroom at the Hotel Windsor, a fundraiser for the charity Cottage by the Sea, to Dame Elizabeth Murdoch's Cruden Farm, where I hosted her spring garden party, and brought out a mighty chuckle from that wonderful dame with my line, "There's nothing crude about Cruden Farm, where even the grass has class." This charity fundraiser for the Alzheimer's Foundation came about through my appearance on the ABC Collectors TV program, where I showcased my Coward collection. As I quipped to the camera, the greatest thing a collector can do is to become the thing that they collect. I have become Noel Coward. "I can't believe how much you look like my old friend, Noel Coward," was Richard Bonning's remark to me over lunch. "Yes, Richard, I've had work done." A friend of Richard's had seen me on the Collectors and consequently sent my Coward CD to him. He wanted to meet this pretender to the Coward throne. Well, neither of us were disappointed. I had the most fascinating long lunch with this world-renowned and most humble of maestros, husband of Dame Joan Sutherland. There were many engaging stories about Noel. They were neighbours in Switzerland. They had adjoining chalets. One can imagine the parties, and Noel borrowing a cup of gin over the hedge. Richard's parting comment to me was, Noel, yes, was an enormously gifted playwright, composer and wit, but his greatest gifts were his generosity and his kindness to others. Another very special event was in this very building, in the Great Hall, which was transformed into a grand high tea room just for me. Well, for Sir Noel Coward, actually. Did you know Coward's knighthood was withheld from him on account of his love affair with Prince George, Duke of Kent? Mr. Coward was almost as frisky as me in his heyday. My high tea show in 2010 was in conjunction with the Rupert Bunny exhibition, where I pulled a Rupert Bunny out of my top hat, as Coward attempted a Cubist tango. It was a resounding triumph. The ladies especially loved having their tea leaves read by Noel Coward, and some rather risque scenes were seen in those cups. Ah, the Theatre Royal in Hobart Town. A dream of a theatre, was Coward's quip when he performed there on his tour of duty of the Allied forces in 1940 to support the war effort and raise money for the Red Cross. I was invited to perform as Noel Coward to celebrate their 175th birthday. Other artists were invited to present tableaus of Laurence Olivier, Vivian Leigh, and the famous Australian comedian Mo, amongst others. A homage to some of the famous stars who had graced that stage. It was quite an honour and very moving to be performing on the same stage as Coward and sharing the dressing room with Cole Joy and Keith Podker from The Seekers, who were so much fun. Finishing up with a curtain call of Cole and Noel holding hands while skipping out to bow. The Big Apple beckons and I heed the call. The wild colonial Noel takes to New York. From the West Village to 42nd Street, Noel's wit explodes like shrapnel, and the New Yorkers love it. From a venue that Woody Allen used to own called the Duplex to Chez Josephine on 42nd Street, owned and run by one of Josephine Baker's rainbow children, Jean-Claude Baker. This colonial coward leaves his mark. I did drop in on Lauren McCall, but she wasn't in. I shall now render Noel Coward's homage to homosexuals of the Victorian and Edwardian era. Blase boys are we, exquisitely free from the dreary and quite absurd moral views of the common herd. We like lollipops, chandeliers and stoves. We're so spirited, carefully filtered souls. Pretty boys, witty boys, too, lazy to fight stagnation. Haughty boys, naughty boys, all we do is to pursue sensation. The pulses of society are always open wide, the way their eccentricity condones. A note of quaint variety we're certain to provide, we dress in very decorative tones. Faded boys, jaded boys, womankind's gift to a bold dark nation, in order to distinguish us from less enlightened minds. We all wear green carnation. We believe in art, though we're miles apart from those fools who are thrilled by glows. We love Beardsley and green chartreuse. When men say where to, or to Bill and Coo, we smile wearily, it's so drearily true. Pretty boys, witty boys, you may sneer at our disintegration. Haughty boys, naughty boys, dear, swooning with affectation. Our fingers sleek and willowy, our lips incarnadine, may worry the majority a bit. But matrons rich and billowy invite us out to dine and revel in our phosphorescent wit. Faded boys, jaded boys, come what may, art is our inspiration. And in order to distinguish us from less enlightened minds, we all wear a green carnation. Thank you. It's the most wonderful song, and it was part of the musical score of Noel Coward's Bittersweet, and it was the Viennese drinking song, and but is obviously very clearly paying homage to men of my ilk, and at that time quite daring to have a song presented in public as this. But Coward was very daring. He was very daring for his age, and it is a remarkable remarkable song. the movie version. The movie version was crap with Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. Coward hated it, but the song saved it. Dear William Mora, at one of his openings said, "Tim, bring back the magic." The magic had never left William. Let's do the Tilano Gallery's retrospective here in my gallery. William, that would be magic, and we did. Come Down With Us was reborn 6 months later with a selection of my favourite songs from the 4 performance art tableaus. In 2015, I gave a paper on my queer history at the Australian Homosexual Histories Conference at the University of Adelaide. And in the following year, I was a part of Hares and Hyenas Midsummer Festival, presenting a pastiche of some of my early cabaret cavortings. In 2017, Quincy McLean and Helen McKew from Bakehouse Studios put on Why Punk, an event at the M Pavilion. I was chuffed to be asked to contribute to it. There were many speakers talking on those anarchic and revolutionary days, such as Pierre Voltaire, Karen Marx, and Ash Wednesday. And I presented my mini-talk on my marauding Magda, the transvestite punk. When the heavens opened and the M Pavilion resembled a giant fish tank, oh, there goes Naomi. She's the patron, by the way. And here comes marriage equality. Am I dreaming? No. We have arrived after the blood, sweat and tears of the ages, after the good fight that we have fought, achieving legal status and equality. Yes, to equal love. Respect. RESPECT. This is what it means to me. I was introduced to Professor Robin Sloggett by the historian, actor, comedian and singer Mary Keneally. Robin Sloggett is the Cripps Foundation Chair in Cultural Materials Conservation and Director of the Grimwade Centre for Cultural Materials Conservation at Melbourne University. I've been delivering my talks and my queer history to her students now for the past 5 years, as a part of her Respect series of lectures on conserving culture and history. I'm always humbled by Professor Robin Sloggett's support of my body of work as an artist and activist. She has championed my work for some years now and has been the driving force behind my autobiography, which this talk is based upon. Fat Tuesday, Here I Come, which is Mardi Gras in English. Last year in 2021, I did Noel Coward on Oxford Street, at the Paris end of Oxford Street, of course, at Claire's Kitchen, and with my wonderful accompanist, Peter de Rijk, who is with me today. I also presented my talk, similar to this, at the State Library of New South Wales, which was a part of their exhibition coming out in the 70s. Our queer communities of Victoria have just celebrated earlier this year the 40th anniversary of the decriminalisation of homosexuality, with many events staged across the state, where I performed my queer anthem, Once Upon a Time, marking some of our queer history throughout the ages. I'm nearing the close of my talk. This talk, Thou Shalt Not, and So I Did. Are you enjoying it? Oh, I knew you had a pulse. That one there certainly has more than a pulse. And Lionel Curtis, he is a pulse. And many friends are with me today, and new faces as well. So it's so wonderful to be sharing my stories with you as the grand finale of the queer exhibition. What do I say? They leave the best to last. I'm humble really underneath all that. Truly I am. Yes. I'd like to thank the National Gallery of Victoria and Andrea Stahl and the other NGV staff who've been so supportive and wonderful to work with. I'd like to thank Peter de Rijk, my pianist. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my stories with you and to thank you all for coming today, you wonderful people out there in the dark. Oh yes, the end was near. Oh yes, I faced the final curtain. My friends, I'll say it clear, I'll state my case, of which I'm certain. I've lived a life that's full, I've traveled each and every highway, but more, much more than this, I did it my way. Regrets, I have a few, but then again, too few to mention. I did what I had to do and saw it through without exemption. I planned each charted course, each careful step along the highway, but more, much more than this, I did it my way. For what is a man? What has he got? If not himself, then he has not to say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels. The record shows I took the blows and did it my way. And there's more to come.
Once upon a time, 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 they were the Mardi Gras. Once upon a time, they were the Mardi Gras. Once upon a time, Joan Hillier was a star. Yes, once upon a time, she fought for who we are. And once upon a time, Don Dunstan wore a bra. A cavalcade of camp, a Trocadero bar. Through trial and tribulation, a voice of celebration. Through trial and tribulation, a voice of celebration. Once upon a time, once upon a time, once upon a time, once was a boy called Wild. He asked all night long, and Sappho she did sing. She sang her siren song. Once upon a time, we were the Mardi Gras. And once upon a time, Peter Tully was a star. Yes, once upon a time, he led the Mardi Gras. A cavalcade of camp, a Trocadero bar. Through trial and tribulation, a voice of celebration. Through trial and tribulation, a voice of celebration. Once upon a time, once upon a time, once upon a time, once upon a, once upon a, once a party gave us milk, and now we're eating meat. Stonewall made us tough, now we're dancing in the street, singing everyone you know, come join the Mardi Gras. Everyone you know celebrating who you are. Yes, once upon a time, Dennis Oldman was a star. A cavalcade of camp, a truck with arrow bar. Through trial and tribulation, a voice of celebration. Through trial and tribulation, a voice of celebration. Well, boys and girls, this journey's been going on since the Big Bang, and I'm looking forward to the day when there are no categories for who we are. Gay, straight, bisexual, transgender, etc. When there are no labels except Chanel. Once upon a time, 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 once upon a, once upon a, once upon a time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You've been a wonderful audience for me today. I feel very moved and yeah, very grateful for you all coming today to my little talk. Now, I think you all need to have a green carnation to take home. And remember, queer is catching. Blame it on Oscar Wilde. Blame it on Oscar Wilde.